The summer heat pressed gently against the quiet house as Elena moved through the kitchen, finishing small tasks she did not need to do, because somewhere deep inside her, she felt a restless pull she could not explain. And it all began with the sound of a car slowing down outside, a sound so ordinary yet heavy with change, because today Marcus's son was arriving, and although Elena had agreed to the visit without hesitation, she now felt an odd tension in her chest, as if the air itself was holding its breath. She wiped her hands on a towel and glanced through the window just as the car stopped, dust rising around the tires, and then Adrian stepped out, taller than the boy she remembered, his shoulders broad, his movements calm but unsure, like someone standing between who they were and who they were about to become. And in that instant Elena felt a sharp awareness she had not felt in years, not desire, not fear, but recognition, as though something important had crossed into her life without asking permission. Daniel's voice drifted from the living room, cheerful and relaxed, calling out a welcome as he walked toward the door, while Elena stayed back for a second longer, steadying herself, telling her reflection in the glass that she was only hosting a guest, nothing more. Yet when Adrian looked up and their eyes met, she felt the ground shift just slightly beneath her feet. Introductions followed quickly, polite words exchanged, smiles practiced, laughter light, but Elena noticed how Adrian listened carefully, how his eyes moved through the house as if he were absorbing not just the space but the feeling of it, the pauses between words, the warmth that lingered in corners, and she wondered what had driven him here, what weight he carried that a vacation was meant to ease. Inside, Adrian placed his bag down neatly, thanked them again, his voice calm but layered with something unspoken, and Elena sensed it immediately, that quiet sadness people carry when they are trying to escape something they cannot name. Dinner that night unfolded easily enough, the three of them seated around the table, plates warm, conversation simple. Marcus mentioned only briefly, and Daniel talked about work, about weather, about plans for the coming weeks, while Adrian answered politely, offering smiles at the right moments. Yet his attention returned to Elena again and again, not in a way that felt wrong, but in a way that felt deeply aware, as if he noticed the tiredness she hid behind kindness, the careful tone she used when speaking to Daniel, the soft sighs she released when she thought no one was listening. Elena caught herself slowing her movements, choosing her words more carefully, aware of his presence in a way she could not explain. And when she laughed, she realized it sounded lighter than it had in years, which unsettled her more than silence would have. After dinner, Daniel excused himself to answer a call, leaving Elena and Adrian alone. In the kitchen, the clink of dishes loud in the quiet, and Adrian offered to help, standing beside her, close enough that she could sense the warmth of him without touching. And for a brief moment, neither spoke, the silence stretching, filled with thoughts neither dared to voice. He finally asked about the house, about how long they had lived there. His questions gentle, thoughtful, and Elena answered, surprised by how easily the words flowed, telling him stories she had not shared in a long time, stories about settling down, about choices made slowly that one day felt sudden. And Adrian listened without interruption, his attention steady, making her feel as if what she said mattered, truly mattered. And when Daniel returned, the moment broke, leaving behind a faint ache she could not explain. Later that night, Elena lay awake in bed beside her sleeping husband, listening to the familiar sounds of the house, the distant hum of insects outside, the soft creak of wood, and she realized the space felt altered, as if a new thread had been woven into the fabric of their lives, delicate but strong, and she wondered why the thought unsettled her so deeply. Across the hall, Adrian sat on the edge of the guest bed, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, replaying the day in his mind, the kindness in Elena's voice, the way she looked at him not as a child, not as a burden, but as someone worth hearing, and for the first time in a long while, he felt both comforted and afraid because something about this place, about her, felt like it mattered more than it should. Neither of them slept easily that night, both unaware that this simple act of opening their door to a guest had already set something irreversible in motion, something quiet, slow, and powerful, waiting to unfold. Morning arrived with soft light and a sense of motion, as if the house itself had decided to move faster now that Adrian was there. And from the first breakfast onward the days slipped into a rhythm that felt easy and strangely alive, because Adrian rose early, helped Daniel without being asked, fixed loose hinges, trimmed branches, and learned the quiet patterns of the home, while Elena watched from a distance, telling herself she was only being a good host, yet noticing how Adrian worked with focus and care, how he listened more than he spoke, how he carried a calm that made space around him feel lighter. Daniel appreciated the help and joked about free labor, unaware of the subtle shifts, while Elena found herself lingering in shared spaces longer than needed, offering coffee refills, asking simple questions that opened deeper answers, and Adrian responded with honesty that surprised her, speaking about school pressure, about friends who felt far away, about a sense of being pushed toward a future he did not fully want, and she listened, nodding, understanding too well what it meant to follow a path because it was expected, not chosen. Days blurred together as they worked and talked, laughter appearing in small bursts, the kind that comes when people feel safe, and Elena noticed. She was smiling more, sleeping less, thinking often, while Adrian felt grounded by her presence, by the way she remembered small details, by the way she encouraged him without trying to shape him. Daniel remained kind but distant, his mind full of deadlines, his energy drained by routine, and though he loved Elena in his steady way, he missed the quiet cracks forming between moments, cracks where something unspoken was growing. One afternoon the heat drove Elena and Adrian to walk toward the lake nearby, the path narrow, shaded, the air thick with the sound of insects, and as they walked side by side, conversation turned soft and personal, words flowing easily, Adrian admitting he felt unsure of himself, unsure of where he belonged, while Elena shared how life can slowly become smaller if you stop asking what you want, and as she spoke, she realized she was also speaking to herself, to the woman she used to be before routine replaced wonder. At the water's edge they sat, feet near the shore, silence settling not as discomfort but as understanding, and in that stillness Elena felt the weight of closeness, the awareness of him beside her, not touching, yet present in a way that stirred something long quiet inside her, while Adrian felt drawn to her warmth, her calm strength, her ability to see him clearly without asking anything in return. When he looked at her, really looked, he saw a woman carrying both kindness and loneliness, and the thought stayed with him as they walked back, their steps slower, their words fewer, each aware of a line neither mentioned. Back at the house, Elena tried to return to routine, but routine no longer fit the same way, because she caught herself waiting for Adrian's footsteps, listening for his voice, noticing the ease with which he filled spaces Daniel no longer noticed, and guilt followed closely behind every quiet thought, reminding her of vows, of years built together, of the trust she held. Evenings became the most dangerous time when Daniel rested and Adrian sat with Elena in shared rooms, talking about books, music, and memories, and though nothing improper happened, emotion filled the air, thick and charged, glances holding a second too long, smiles lingering, pauses stretching until one of them spoke to break the tension. Adrian felt torn between respect and feeling, knowing she was married, knowing he was a guest, yet unable to ignore how deeply seen he felt, how much her attention mattered, while Elena battled herself daily, reminding her heart of boundaries, even as it responded to the way Adrian looked at her as if she still had untold stories left to live. One evening, as rain fell suddenly and power flickered, they sat at the table with candles, Daniel briefly stepping out to take a call, leaving them alone in soft light, and Adrian spoke quietly about how this place felt safe, how Elena made him feel understood in ways he hadn't known he needed, and though he did not confess anything outright, the meaning sat clearly between them, heavy and undeniable. Elena's chest tightened as she answered carefully, telling him that safety can be powerful, that connection does not always mean direction, that some feelings come to teach rather than to take, and Adrian listened, absorbing every word, even as disappointment flickered across his face, quickly hidden. When Daniel returned, conversation resumed, but something had shifted, an awareness that could not be undone, and that night Elena stood alone at the sink long after dishes were clean, staring at her reflection, seeing both desire and restraint in her eyes, realizing that this visit was no longer simple, that emotions had stepped forward without permission. Adrian lay awake in the guest room, staring into darkness, replaying her words, feeling grateful and wounded at the same time, knowing he could not stay untouched by this experience, yet unable to wish it away, because something inside him had already changed, grown stronger and more honest. By morning, both carried quiet resolve mixed with longing, aware that the days ahead would demand choices, not actions but control, and that sometimes the hardest battles are fought in silence, within hearts that must learn to hold feeling without letting it break everything else. The days that followed carried a quiet pressure, like air before a storm, and everything moved faster on the surface while slowing deep inside, because Elena became careful in ways she had never needed to be before, choosing where to stand, when to speak, how long to look, while Adrian sensed the shift immediately, understanding without being told that something delicate was being protected. Yet the closeness did not disappear, it only changed shape, becoming more controlled, more restrained, and somehow more intense. Daniel remained unaware, grateful for the help, pleased with the calm of the household, joking at dinner, trusting the balance of his life, while Elena felt the weight of that trust pressing against her chest every time Adrian entered the room. Adrian tried to distract himself, spending longer hours outside, running in the mornings, reading at night, but his thoughts always circled back, drawn by the memory of Elena's voice, her steady presence, the way she listened without judgment, and he hated himself for wanting something he knew he should not, even as the feeling refused to fade. One evening after a long day, a sudden power outage wrapped the house in darkness and candles were lit, their small flames casting soft shadows that changed familiar spaces into something fragile and intimate, and they gathered in the living room, Daniel sinking into the couch, tired and heavy with sleep, while Elena and Adrian sat across from each other, the silence broken only by the hum of night sounds outside. Time slowed, the candlelight softening faces, and in that quiet Adrian felt the weight of all the things he had not said pressing against his chest. His heart racing not with excitement but with urgency, because he sensed the visit was reaching a point where silence would no longer protect anyone. Daniel's breathing deepened as sleep took him and, though nothing improper happened, the awareness of being alone together sharpened everything, and Adrian finally spoke, his voice low, careful, admitting not love but change, saying that being here had altered the way he saw himself, that Elena had helped him feel steady when everything else felt uncertain, that her kindness had mattered more than she could know. Elena listened, hands folded tightly, heart pounding, because every word echoed something she had been afraid to name, and when she answered, her voice was gentle but firm, telling him that some connections arrive to teach restraint, that timing can make even beautiful feelings dangerous, that crossing certain lines would leave damage no apology could erase. Adrian absorbed her words slowly, pain visible but controlled, because he respected her too much to argue, too much to pretend he did not understand, and though disappointment settled heavily inside him, he also felt gratitude, because she had been honest without cruelty, clear without rejection. Daniel stirred briefly, mumbling something, then fell back asleep, and the moment passed, leaving behind a silence thicker than before, filled with everything unsaid. Later that night, Elena lay awake beside Daniel, staring at the ceiling, her chest tight with emotion she had never expected to feel again. Not guilt alone, not longing alone, but a deep sadness for the parts of herself she had allowed to sleep for so long, parts Adrian had unknowingly awakened. And she wondered how close she had come to making a choice she could never undo. Tears slipped silently as she faced the truth that desire does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly, dressed as understanding, and that realization frightened her more than temptation ever could. Across the hall, Adrian sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders tense, replaying her words, understanding that staying meant hurting, and leaving meant losing something that had already changed him. And he felt the heavy step of adulthood settle over him, the realization that doing the right thing often feels like loss. The next day unfolded with careful politeness, smiles softer, conversations lighter, both of them pretending ease for Daniel's sake, but inside, something had shifted permanently, because awareness cannot be undone, and restraint requires constant effort. Adrian avoided being alone with Elena, choosing distance as an act of respect, while Elena focused on routine, cooking, cleaning, filling her time with movement to avoid thought. Yet every small interaction carried weight, every glance carried memory. Daniel noticed nothing beyond a subtle quiet he assumed was fatigue, unaware that the house was holding a story too heavy for sound. By evening, Adrian knew what he had to do, the decision forming slowly but firmly, because staying longer would only deepen what needed to fade, and though the thought hurt, it also brought clarity. Elena sensed the shift before he spoke, a tightening in her chest, a sadness she recognized as necessary, and when Adrian mentioned a possible early return, citing responsibilities and plans, she nodded calmly, though her heart ached with both relief and loss. That night, they spoke briefly in the kitchen while Daniel showered, exchanging polite words layered with meaning, both understanding that this chapter was closing without needing to be explained. There was no touch, No confession, only quiet respect and a shared understanding that some bonds exist to reveal truths, not to be claimed. As Elena went to bed, she felt drained but grounded, realizing that strength sometimes means choosing stillness over desire, and Adrian lay awake knowing that this experience, though unresolved, had given him something lasting, a clearer sense of himself, a deeper understanding of boundaries, and the painful but necessary knowledge that maturity is often born in moments where the heart must be held back. The night passed slowly, carrying with it the weight of choices made not through action, but through restraint, and by morning both knew that the hardest part was already over, even if the ache would linger long after the visit ended. The morning Adrian left arrived quietly, without drama, yet the air felt heavier than it had any right to be, and Elena woke before sunrise with a sharp sense of finality pressing against her chest, knowing before anyone spoke that the house was about to lose something it would never fully replace. Daniel moved through his routine unaware, yawning, making coffee, joking about the early hour, while Adrian packed his bag neatly, his movements calm but careful, as if any sudden motion might crack the fragile control he had built inside himself. Elena stayed busy in the kitchen, pretending focus, listening to the soft sounds of departure, each one landing like a quiet goodbye she was not allowed to mourn openly. And when Adrian finally stepped into the room, ready to leave, she forced a steady smile, one built from respect rather than ease. Explanations were simple and polite: college matters, plans changing, nothing dramatic, nothing untrue, and Daniel accepted it easily, clapping Adrian on the shoulder, thanking him for his help, proud of the young man he believed he was helping shape, never guessing how much that summer had already shaped them all. The goodbye was brief, a handshake for Daniel, a short hug for Elena, respectful and distant, yet filled with everything they had chosen not to say. And in that moment Elena felt both relief and loss wash over her at once, because the temptation was gone, but so was the clarity it had brought. Adrian met her eyes for just a second longer than necessary, a silent thank you passing between them, then turned away and left, the sound of the car fading down the road like a chapter closing without ceremony. The house returned to its familiar quiet, but it no longer felt the same, because absence can be louder than presence, and Elena felt it in every room, in the spaces where conversation had once flowed easily, in the corners where awareness had lived. Days passed, then weeks, and routine settled back in. Yet Elena moved through it differently now, more awake, more honest with herself, noticing the distance that had quietly grown between her and Daniel long before Adrian arrived, realizing that comfort and connection are not the same thing. She began speaking more openly, asking questions she had avoided, listening instead of assuming, and though change was slow and sometimes awkward, it was real, built not from guilt but from understanding. Daniel, surprised but willing, responded in his steady way, unaware of the full reason behind her shift, yet grateful for the attention, the renewed effort, the sense that something was being repaired rather than ignored. Adrian, meanwhile, returned to his life carrying more than memories, carrying restraint, clarity, and a deeper sense of responsibility, understanding now that attraction does not equal permission, that feelings do not always demand action, and that respect can be a form of strength. Months later, a message arrived, simple and honest, saying he was doing well, that the time away had helped him focus, that he was grateful for the calm and care he had found during that summer. And Elena read it slowly, smiling with a mix of warmth and sadness, replying with encouragement and kindness, nothing more, nothing less. The exchange was brief, clean, and complete, a final quiet acknowledgement that what they shared belonged to the past, not because it was wrong, but because it had served its purpose. As seasons changed, Elena found herself lighter, not because she had forgotten, but because she had learned, because she understood now that even restrained connections can awaken parts of the heart that demand attention, not indulgence. The vacation that had once seemed ordinary became a turning point she carried privately, a reminder that life can shift without warning, that emotional honesty matters, and that sometimes the most meaningful choices are the ones no one ever sees. The house settled back into its steady rhythm, yet Elena moved through it with intention, caring for what she had instead of longing for what could not be, and in that quiet resolve, she found peace. Adrian moved forward as well, changed but grounded, knowing that not every story needs to be lived fully to be important. and that some chapters exist only to teach the reader who they are becoming. In the end, nothing scandalous happened, no rules were broken, yet everything changed, because growth does not always arrive through action. Sometimes it arrives through restraint, through choosing respect over desire, and through understanding that even brief encounters can leave lasting marks on the heart without ever crossing a line.